Shalom Aleichem. We are learning Lekuta Sichas Chelek Yud Ches, Balak Beis, the second Sicha of Balak, which is the first Sicha in the Kunteris Dvar Malchus, Chidushim Ubiyurim Behilchas Malachim, that the Rebbe distributed on Tezvav Iyar, Tavshin Nun Aleph. And the first Sicha explores the Pedic Yud Aleph, the 11th Pedic of the Rambam Hilchas Malachim, which is the first of the two prakim where the Rambam discusses the coming of Mashiach. And we're going to ask a series of questions, go through each halacha almost of the Pedic, asking question after question in understanding the way the Rambam structures the Pedic, why he brings what he brings, why he lays it out the way he lays it out, and why he says and chooses the specific words that he does. And based on that, we're going to reach a new understanding in what is, according to the Rambam, the role and the job of Mashiach. And as the title of as the heading of the siman is Chazaras Malchus Beis David Ushleimus Mishpatei HaTorah, to restore the kingdom of the dynasty of David HaMelech, and to bring to the completion of the fulfillment of the laws of Torah, that the role of Mashiach is to bring back Malchus Beis David, so that way the Torah could be fulfilled in its most perfect form. We'll begin by learning from the Rambam itself. In other words, we're going to learn out of the Kunteris Dvar Malchus. And but before we go in to begin, we'll read from the actual Rambam. So either you could open up the Rambam or you could listen, and I'll tell you what the Rambam says. I'm starting from the beginning of Halacha Aleph, even though the Sikha begins in the middle of Halacha Aleph. But Perek HaChadasar begins like this: HaMelech HaMashiach Asad Lamed Lahachzer Malchus David Liyesh. The Mashiach is going to come and going to bring back the kingdom of the dynasty of David HaMelech to its original sovereignty. The Memshala HaRishayna. Ubeina HaMikdash is going to build the Beis HaMikdash. Umekabes Nitchei Yisrael is going to gather the dispersed of the Yidden. The Chayzin al Mishpatim B'Yam K'Shayim Mikaydem, and all of the laws will return in his time as they were originally. Makrivin Karbanis, V'Oisin Shmita V'Yevles, K'Chal Mitzvah Samar B'Torah. There'll be Karbanis, there'll be Shmita, there'll be Yovel, as everything as is explained in the Torah. Then the Rambam says, anybody that does not believe in Mashiach, or does not await the coming of Mashiach, not only does he deny what was given over to us or was conveyed to us by the Nevi'im, by the later prophets, but that person is denying the Torah itself and Moshe Rabbeinu, because the promise of the coming of Mashiach is not just from the Nevi'im, it's from the Torah itself. Like it says, David is going to return you from your captivity, and he's going to have mercy on you. And he's going to bring you back, going to gather you. Even if you'll be in the furthest corner of the heavens, Hashem will bring you back. And these words that are said clearly in the Torah, they are inclusive of all of the later details that are given to us by the Nevi'im. They are all included in what was already said in the Torah. So therefore, if someone denies the coming of Mashiach, chas v'shalom, or does not await for his coming, what he is doing is he's a kafir, he is denying in the Torah itself. Then the Rambam continues, does not suffice with this one proof, brings another proof from the Torah that Mashiach and Geula are in Torah Shebiksav. After Parshas Bilam Nemar, also in Parshas Bilam, it speaks about Mashiach. Visham Niba B'Shnei HaMashiachim, and over there is a nevuah about the two anointed kings. The Mashiach Harishon Shehu David, the first Mashiach, the first anointed king, which was David. Shoishiyas Yisrael miyatzareim, who saved the Yidden in his time from those who were oppressing them. The Mashiach ha'acharein, and the final Mashiach, she'emid mibanav, who is going to come from the descendants of David HaMelech, she'Mashiach Yisrael ba'achareina, who is going to save the Yidden in the end of days. The Rambam does not suffice with this general statement that there is a reference to Mashiach or even to the two Mashiachim in Parshas Bilam, but the Rambam elaborates and explains, quotes the pasuk, "Erenu v'layata," I see it but not now. Zeh David, this refers to David. Asherenu v'leikarev, I perceive it, but not in the near future. Zeh Melech HaMashiach, this refers to Mashiach. Darach keichav miyakov, a star shall go forth from Yaakov, Zeh David, this refers to David. V'kam shevet mi Yisrael, and a staff shall arise in Yisrael by Yidden, Zeh Melech HaMashiach, this refers to Mashiach. Umochatz pasei Moav, it's going to crush the princes of Moav, Zeh David, this refers to David HaMelech, V'cheinu Omer, Vayaches Moav v'yimadedim b'chevel, that David smote Moav. So we see that Umachatz pasei Moav goes on David. The Karkar called Bnei Sheis, and he's going to destroy all of the children of Sheis. Zeh HaMelech HaMashiach, this refers to Mashiach. Shenemar boy umoshloi or mishaloi miyam ad yam, is going to rule from one seat to the other seat, meaning to say the whole world, referring to all of the children of Sheis, all of the people of the world. And then Edom will be demolished. Zeh David, this refers to David HaMelech. Shenemar vati Edom le David lavadim agamer, that Edom became the servants, the slaves of David. And then Seir will be destroyed. Zeh HaMelech HaMashiach, this refers to Mashiach. Shenemar ve'olu meshiyim ba'artzion, that those who come to save them will go up on Har Tzion to judge Har Esav. So we see that Mashiach comes, we're going to destroy Esav. And that's the end of Halacha Aleph. So we have now two proofs that Mashiach is in the Torah. One from V'shav Hashem Elokecha Shvuscha, and two from the Nevuah in Parshas Bilam, where it speaks about the two Mashiachim, including Mashiach, the Mashiach HaAchrein, or the Melech HaMashiach, as he's called here. And he actually brings us the four psukim and points out in each pasuk which part of the pasuk is about David HaMelech and which part of the pasuk is about Melech HaMashiach. Now the next halacha, which we're going to get to a little bit later in the Sikha, is the third raya that to the coming of Mashiach in the Torah, and that's from the mitzvah of Arei Miklot, where it says, "Im yarchev Hashem Elokecha es gvulcha," that a time is going to come that Hashem is going to expand our borders, which never happened yet. Obviously, a reference to the coming of Mashiach, and that's a third raya, which is in halacha beis, and that's going to be addressed a little bit later in the sikha. Okay. So I'm starting now from the second paragraph, because the first paragraph was just the same quote from the Rambam in Ilchas Malachim. Hine Sefer Ayad, Areyu Sefer Halachas. A Sefer Ayad, the Sefer of the Rambam, is a Sefer of Halachas. Kedibri Rambam Magdamas, a Sefer like the way the Rambam writes in his own Hakdama, that that the purpose of this Sefer is to bring down the Halachas of the Torah. The Lo Shal Drashis al Psukei Torah v'Kayitzah, and it's not a Sefer of Drashis, Kamedrish, where you bring down psukim to understand the psukim and what can be learned from them. There's a similar sikha on the words of the Rambam, where he says, "Apara Asidis Yasa Melech HaMashiach Meheira Yigala Amin Kein Yiratzon." The Rebbe addresses the fact that why was the Rambam bringing a tefillah Meheira Yigala Amin Kein Yiratzon if he's in the middle of a Sefer Halachas? But then the Rebbe answers that it's a halacha. Halacha is that whenever you mention Mashiach, it has to come together with a tefillah. But we see that the Rambam is a Sefer Halachas, and therefore we must understand. In order to prove this halacha, that whoever does not believe in Mashiach Whoever does not wait for the coming of Mashiach. Is a kafir, is someone who's denying the Torah itself. And Moshe Rabbeinu, oh, your maspik ilu, or your case of Iraq after Parshas Bilam. It would have sufficed to say, for the Rambam to write, that it also in Parshas Bilam, Nemar, it speaks about Mashiach. Visham niba b'Mashiach ha'achar shemid bibanav, and over there in Parshas Bilam, there's a nevuah about the final Mashiach, who is a descendant of David HaMelech. Shemashiach Yisrael ba'achareina, who is going to save the Yidden in the end of times. We would have already known that it's talking about psukim, that's talking about the psukim of Nevuah, which began with the words Asher Yasa Ha'om Hazel Amcha B'Achritz Hayamim, that what's going to happen to this people in the end of days. So we know that that in Parshas Bilam there's a section talking about the end of times, Bias HaMashiach. V'lomo le'la'arich b'protei harayis v'ksuvim elu meduber eidish shnei HaMashiachim v'almi meramis kol chelek mi'akasav v'chulu. Why does the Rambam have to elaborate on the details of the rayis in the psukim to actually list the psukim where we see that there is a reference to Mashiach? And specifically, why does the Rambam need to mention both Mashiachim and tell us which part of each pasuk refers to each of the Mashiachim respectively? And even if the Rambam wanted to help us out and give us a more defined source as to which psukim we're talking about, it would have sufficed for the Rambam to bring the beginning and the end of these psukim. That it said in the following psukim, Arenu v'layata, which is the beginning of the four, the Goimar, etc., which is the end of the four psukim. And I would know that these four psukim are where Mashiach is discussed in the Torah in Parshas Bilam. So this is our first question. Our first question is, why does the Rambam deem it necessary to bring in the four psukim that speak about Shnei HaMashiachim, both Mashiachim, and to tell us which part of which pasuk refers to which of the Mashiachim? That's the question number one. In Seif Beis, we're going to elaborate on this question. We're going to understand that we need more than the raya of Hashem Hashem Elokecha Shavuscha. We need the raya from Parshas Bilam, but it still doesn't explain to us why we need the details that the Rambam gives us. From the fact that the Rambam adds the raya from Parshas Bilam. Even though the Rambam already brought one raya to the general idea of the coming of Mashiach from Torah, from the pasuk V'shav Hashem Elokecha Shavuscha, mashma ukemuv mepashtus l'shaynoi. It mashma, as we could understand from the simple understanding of the basic words of the Rambam, shaksuvim miparshas Bilam, maybe a Rambam beikir. Leira kiraya letzem bias Mashiach geulas Yisrael me'agalus. That the Rambam is bringing the psukim from Parshas Bilam not just to know that there's going to be a geula, not just to know that there's going to be a Mashiach who's going to take the Yidden out of galus. Elagam sheniba b'shnei HaMashiachim, the Mashiach harishon shehu David chulu u'Mashiach achar shehu mibanav. The Rambam has a reason. He wants us to know that there's a nevuah about both Mashiachim. And this is why the Rambam has to elaborate and itemize the specific psukim, where we see in the psukim that there's a nevuah with regards to both Mashiachim. But that in itself is our question. We could understand why we need the second raya from Parshas Bilam, and it doesn't suffice with the raya from V'shav Hashem Elokecha Shavuscha. Yesh leima, we could explain that. Shezeu mipnei shebekasu V'shav Hashem Elokecha Shavuscha lenemer shezeh yildei Mashiach. In the pasuk that Hashem is going to return the captives from exile, this does not say that it's going to be by Mashiach. It doesn't say who's going to do it. It could be the Eibusher is going to do it. So there's no clear raya from that pasuk. There is a raya to the geula that there's going to be a V'shav Hashem Elokecha Shavuscha, but the fact that it will be done by Mashiach, that is not necessarily understood from those psukim. Therefore, he brings another raya from Parshas Bilam, where we see clearly in the Torah, Sheniba al Melech HaMashiach, that there's nevuah not just about the Geula, but about the person, the Melech HaMashiach, who's going to take the Yidden out of Galus. So that part we understand, that V'shav Hashem Elokecha Shavuscha is a raya to the existence of the Geula in Torah. Parshas Bilam is a raya to the existence of, or to the nevuah, I should say, of Melech HaMashiach in Torah. Abel man negeya leharayis min haTorah al bias HaMashiach. Shesham niba le'rak Mashiach ha'achrin ela gam b'David Mashiach harishon. But the question remains: why is it negeya? How is it relevant to know that in Parshas Bilam the nevuah is about not just the final, ultimate Melech HaMashiach, but also about David, who's Mashiach Harishon? Ubifrat ba'arichas lefarish kol prati alashenes ba'ksuvim eze me'em medabrim b'melech David v'yeze b'melech HaMashiach, and especially to elaborate and enumerate each of the psukim exactly which one is which part of the pasuk is talking about David the Melech, which part of the pasuk is talking about Mashiach. So this question is an extension of the question we had in Seif Aleph. We understand the chiddush of the second raya, that we wanted a raya to where we could see that Mashiach is discussed in the Torah, and that we don't see it necessarily from V'shav Hashem Elokecha Shavuscha. But how is that raya enhanced or strengthened by the fact that it was Niba B'Shnei HaMashiachim, that this discusses both Mashiachs, David HaMelech and Mashiach, and especially in the detail that the Rambam goes into to list the four psukim and tell us which part of the pasuk is about David HaMelech and which part of the pasuk is about Melech HaMashiach. In Seif Gimel, he's going to suggest that maybe knowing that a king arose and helped the Yidden like David HaMelech did will help us believe in Mashiach. Maybe the Rambam brings it to tell us, don't worry, it's not this fantastical prophecy that may seem out of reach, out of reality. It's a real thing. It's happened before. Maybe that's why the Rambam brings the Shnei HaMashiachim. And the Rebbe is going to explain that cannot be the reason. The Chayda we could answer, the fact that the reason why the Rambam brings a raya of proof also to the fact that the nevuah was about both Mashiachim, Gam Mashiach Harishon David Sheishias Yisrael v'chulu, also with regards to the first Mashiach, referring to David HaMelech, who saved the Yidden in his time from their oppressors. Because we didn't even address this yet, but why is it important that David HaMelech is known as Mashiach, just like Melech HaMashiach? So much so that we're referring to them as Ha-Mashiachim, the Mashiachim. We're referring to both David HaMelech and Melech HaMashiach as the Mashiachim. In other words, we are comparing the two. Why do we have to compare the two? If we wanted to just say Niba about David HaMelech, it could have said Niba b'Shnei HaMelachim, or something like that. Why do we have to refer to Ha-Mashiachim, to refer to both of them as Mashiach? So it could be that the fact that the Rambam refers to both David HaMelech and Mashiach as HaMashiachim is actually answering to us our question that there is a relevance here to the fact that Niba b'Shnei HaMashiachim. It helps us. How does it help us? It's relevant to our faith, to our emunah in the coming of Mashiach, and it strengthens our emunah in Mashiach. Why? Because when we will realize, when we'll know that the idea of Mashiach is not a brand new concept. Because we already had in our history the first Mashiach, meaning David HaMelech, who saved the Yidden from their oppressors at the time. This adds strength and an intensity to our emunah. That also in the future, Mashiach is coming and he's going to help the Yidden. Al derech echachas Chazal al tchiyas hamesim, similar to the proof that the Chazal bring in Sanhedrin on tchiyas hamesim. Delay hava chaya, the hava chaya lekol shekin. Over there, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the Gemara is saying that Amin and Apikoidis came to Gviya ben Pesisa, and he said, how could you believe that people that are dead are going to become alive? So Gviya ben Pesisa answered him, those who never existed come into being. They're born. They live. That we see. So someone who was already alive, that he can come back to life, is not such a big deal. They were already alive. So similar to that, you could say there already was a concept of a melech, of a Mashiach, who saved the Yidden from their tzarei and from their oppressors. So to believe in it again is more realistic. Or we could rephrase this in another way that we could bring out how talking about the Shnei HaMashiachim is actually mechazik, it strengthens our emunah that in Mashiach. Like the Mefarshim write. Since with regards to the nevuah, both Mashiach, it is spoken about in the same nevuah. Harei כשם שנזכרים חלק הנבואה בנוגע למשיח הראשון שהוא דוד שישיח ישראל מיצריהם. So now I could take inspiration, I could take strength, just like the first part of the nevuah, the part about David HaMelech who's going to save the Yidden from their oppressors in his time, was fulfilled. Kein bevadai tekuyim hanevuah al dvar Mashiach ha'achrein she'ayim mibanim she'Mashiach Yisrael b'achreina. And I could now believe with confidence in the that certainly the nevuah of the second part, that a Mashiach ha'achrein is going to come and save the Yidden from b'achreina in the end of times. It's going to be just like similar in the end of the Gemara Makis, where it says that Rabbi Akiva laughed when he saw the fox coming out from the Makom of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, because he said that once I see the nevuah of Tzion Sada Techrash is fulfilled, and the nevuah of the Galus was fulfilled, now I know for sure that the nevuah of the Geula will be fulfilled. So either you could say that once you know that it happened before, it gives you belief that it could happen again, or you could say that since they're both in the same nevuah, knowing that part of the nevuah was fulfilled, it gives you strength to believe in the second part of the nevuah. So this is a suggestion for why the Rambam brings the Shnei HaMashiachim, because it helps us believe in Mashiach, knowing that it happened before, knowing that the beginning of the nevuah is already fulfilled, makes me believe in the second part of the nevuah. Mashiach is coming. There's going to be a time when Mashiach is going to come, L'Ishias Yisrael. I will move on to Kasha Lefaris Kalatam. But it's obvious that it's very difficult to say that this is the Rambam's entire purpose. It works, it helps, but this cannot be the reason why the Rambam brings these psukim in this halacha. Ki viksuvim elu, in these psukim, ein kavanas Rambam ki pashtus l'shoinoi lahavi raya ve'ichacha shemelech haMashiach v'adayaveh. The Rambam isn't coming here to prove to us that Mashiach is coming. Like the Rambam says, the purpose of the Rambam here, the Rambam is trying to prove to us that the coming of Mashiach is written in the Torah. And because of that, we would conclude that someone doesn't believe in Mashiach, or someone does not await for the coming of Mashiach. He's not just denying the messages from the Nevi'im, he's denying the message of Torah and the message of Moshe Rabbeinu, because the prophecy about Mashiach is in the Torah. So the Rambam is not coming here to be mechazik our emunah in Mashiach. The Rambam is coming here to prove to us that Mashiach is in the Torah, and therefore we have to believe in it. So back to our question: why is it relevant that the nevuah in Parshas Bilam is about both Mashiachim, Gam Mashiach Harishon Shehu David, including the first Mashiach, that which is David HaMelech, and especially lefarish as arbas alashenis akfulim b'shviksuvim elu, and especially to explain the four double psukim in these, the four double expressions in these psukim, that in the first part of each of the psukim, the intent is the first Mashiach, which is David HaMelech, Ubishnim the Mashiach Achrein, and the second part of the pasuk of each of the psukim is a reference to Mashiach. So we try to answer that there's a relevance here, because knowing that there's two Mashiachim, it strengthens our emunah in Mashiach. And the answer to that, and the refutation to that, is that if the Rambam's purpose here is to prove to us specifically that Mashiach is in the Torah, not so much to prove to us that Mashiach is coming, then once you tell me that Mashiach is in the Torah, I don't need to know about David HaMelech, and especially to know all the details the way that Rambam elaborates. So we're still holding on to this question, which is, why does the Rambam elaborate so much in this halacha to list the four psukim, and to tell us that Niva B'Shnei HaMashiachim, and to tell us about David HaMelech, and to bring all four psukim, and to tell us which parts of the psukim are about David and which parts of the psukim are about HaMelech HaMashiach. Sif Daled. Sif Daled is going to address the next halacha in the Rambam, halacha Beis, in Perek Yud Aleph, where the Rambam brings a third raya to the fact that Mashiach is in the Torah. Hemshach was a case of Rambam in continuation to this halacha, proving that Mashiach is in the Torah. The Rambam writes as follows: but it's in its own separate halacha. It's not in the same paragraph, in the same halacha as the first two rayas, and it's in its own halacha. The Rambam says, also with regards to the Ori Miklat, it says that Hashem is going to expand your borders. And you should add another 3 cities that would serve as Ori Miklat, as cities of refuge. The Goimer. This never happened. It never happened yet that the borders of Eretz Yisrael were expanded beyond what it says in the Torah. And certainly Hashem did not give a command for nothing. So therefore, it must be that it's still going to happen. When is it going to happen? When Mashiach comes. Mashiach is going to come and the borders of Eretz Yisrael will be expanded. So here you have a third proof, that to the third reference to the coming of Mashiach in Torah Shebiksav, in the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, not just in the Nevi'im. Now we're going to ask 2 questions. Number 1, why does the Rambam put this in a separate halacha? And number 2, why does the Rambam reference Arei Miklat and not Parshas Shoftim or any other way to reference these halachas? This halacha, these psukim about Arei Miklat. We know that the division of halacha is precise. The Rambam himself divided up his halachas into specific sections. And therefore this leads us to ask the following question: why does the Rambam bring this raya, this proof, in its own halacha, and not in the previous halacha, together with the other 2 proofs that Mashiach is min ha-Torah? And if it's proper that each raya, each proof, should be in its own halacha, then he should have written also the previous raya, the raya from Parshas Bilam, also in its own halacha. In other words, the raya of Shavashem and the raya from Parshas Bilam are both in halacha Aleph, and Arei Miklat is in halacha Beis. So if they have to each be in their own halacha, then why is Parshas Bilam and Shavashem in the same halacha? And if they each have to be in a separate, and if they can all be in the same halacha, then why is Arei Miklat in a different halacha? Gam, another question. Why does the Rambam specify the makir, especially to use the makir of af ba'arei miklat, loy af parshas shoftim, and not refer to the parsha that it's in? Similar to what he said earlier with Parshas Bilam, especially as the Rebbe brings in the Ha'ara that Arei Miklat is another parshas also. Arei Miklat is mentioned in Parshas Masei and in Parshas Va'eschanon. So you say Arei Miklat, you don't know which parsha it is. So why do we need the makir? If we need the makir, why not say which parsha it is, which is parsha Shoftim, especially since there are other Arei Miklat sections. Obviously, from the fact that he says the words Af Ba'arei Miklat, there must be something that he's teaching us. What is it? In Sifhei, we're going to ask another question. In Sifhei, we're going to ask the question about the term Mashiach. Why is David HaMelech over here called Mashiach? We also have to understand the specificity of the lashon, the term Bishnei HaMashiachim. Mazen Negei Lekan. What is it relevant over here? Uba medavke rak David, and in what element, in what aspect is only David Nikra Mashiach called Mashiach? Bishnei HaMashiachim implies that there was two Mashiachim. There's Melech HaMashiach, and then there's David HaMelech. So first of all, why is it Negei that David is called Mashiach? And why is only David called Mashiach? Shaharei, in the brackets he adds, Kishem she David nimshach b'shemen hamishcha bekeren v'nikra Mashiach Hashem. Just like David was anointed with shemen hamishcha, it was with a horn, and he's therefore called Mashiach Hashem. In the Gemara in Megillah, it says about the different women who were Nevi'im, Nevi'os. It says that Chana was a Nevi'ah because she said the pasuk, Olatz libi ba'Hashem, Ramo karni ba'Hashem. My horn was raised to Hashem. So it says the fact that you use the word karni and not pachi, my picture, is a nevuah, because David and Shloimeh, who were anointed with a keren, with oil that came from a horn, their malchus lasted. Their malchus is eternal. And Shaul and Yehu, who were anointed with oil that came from a pach, from a pitcher, their kingdom did not last. That's what the Gemara says in Megillah. So we know that David HaMelech was anointed with oil that came from a keren, and there's a pasuk in Shmuel Beis that says, "Vayan Avishai ben Tzruya vayemer hasacha zeis layumashimi ki kilel as Mashiach Hashem." He cursed Mashiach Hashem, referring to David HaMelech. So David HaMelech is called Mashiach Hashem because he was anointed with oil. But nevertheless, we find earlier in Tanakh, Nimshech Shaul bepach. Shaul was anointed with oil that came from a pitcher. Also, Shaul is called Mashiach Hashem. For example, as a pasuk in Shmuel Beis, Perek Aleph, pasuk Yud Dalid, v'yemer of David, Eich li'areisa l'shliach yadcha, l'shaches es Mashiach Hashem. So the question is that why is David referred to as Mashiach, and why is only David Mashiach? If you're referring to the fact that a person was anointed with Shemen HaMishcha, also Shaul was anointed, and others. V'im nechalek, this word is I think supposed to be nechalek, Shnei Mashiach Yisrael Barishenu B'Achareina. And now that we're asking about David HaMelech, why is David HaMelech called Mashiach? If you're going to tell me that you wanted to have from two extremes of history, then on the one hand you have one from the end of times, Mashiach, and then you wanted to go to a Mashiach that was in the beginning of times. It would have been more appropriate to bring in Moshe Rabbeinu as the first Goyal, the first Redeemer, Mashiach, and Malach HaMashiach as the final Redeemer. Both of whom are actually saving the Yidden from a Galus. Mashiach King David. Unlike David HaMelech, Taka helped the Yidden in his time, but he didn't actually take them out of a Galus. Moshe Rabbeinu took the Yidden out of Mitzrayim. So if you're looking for someone in the beginning of Jewish history that did something similar to what Mashiach is going to do, then you have Moshe Rabbeinu. And it's important to note that also with regards to their level, Moshe Rabbeinu versus David, in their level of Nevuah, Kasav Rambam, the Rambam writes, Mashiach Gadol Mikol HaNeviim, the Mashiach is greater than all the Nevi'im. Or the way he actually writes in the Sefer Hayad, the Navi Gadolu, the Mashiach is a great Navi, Karev Moshe Rabbeinu, similar to Moshe Rabbeinu. Mashiach King David. But by regards to David HaMelech, it doesn't say anything about how great he was in Nevuah. Clearly, Moshe Rabbeinu was a much greater Navi than David HaMelech. And Mashiach, who is defined as the greatest Navi, or a Navi similar to Moshe Rabbeinu, is removed, in a sense, from David HaMelech, who was not such a great Navi. So here's another element where we see a distinction between David and Mashiach. So this takes us back to our question, why does he bring, so there's like three details here. Number one, why is David HaMelech referred to as Mashiach? And why specifically David is known as Mashiach when there were other people who were anointed by Hashem? If we're trying to find someone from the earlier times, why not bring Moshe Rabbeinu? Especially since Moshe Rabbeinu was A, someone who took Yidden out of a galus, and B, a much greater Navi, which therefore much closer to who Mashiach is going to be than David HaMelech. So these are our questions. Question number one is, why does the Rambam elaborate and bring these 4 psukim about the Shnei HaMashiachim and go into the details of each of the psukim and what they are referring to? Question number 2 is, why does the Rambam bring the raya of Ari Miklat in its own halacha? And why doesn't he reference it by calling it Parsha Shoftim? Why specifically called Ari Miklat? And question 3 is, why does he refer to David as a Mashiach? Why specifically David? And why not Moshe Rabbeinu, who took the Yidden out of Mitzrayim and who was a greater Navi than David HaMelech? So we're going in Sivav, we're going to begin the answer. But as is very common in the Likutei Sichos, we're going to begin the answer by asking a few more questions. The next Sivav and Siv Zayin are going to ask 2 more questions on the next 2 halachas in the Rambam in Perek Yud Aleph. I will understand all this by first prefacing and explaining 2 more questions that we have in the following 2 halachas, Hilchos Malachim Sham and Hilchos Malachim in Perek Yud Aleph. Halacha Gimel, Kosav Rambam, in the Halacha Gimel, the Rambam writes, you shouldn't think that Melech HaMashiach has to do signs, has to make signs and miracles, and to introduce new things into the world, or to bring the mason, bring people, the dead, back to life, or similar supernatural things. You shouldn't think the Mashiach has to do supernatural things. This is not true. He brings the raya from Rabbi Akiva. Maybe Raya Shami Ben Kuziva, he brings the raya from Ben Kuziva that Rabbi Akiva was from the Noisei Kalim, who was very, very close to Ben Kuziva, also known as Bar Kochva, and he believed he was Mashiach. And it wasn't until he was killed, until Ben Kuziva was killed, that it became evident that he wasn't Mashiach. But he says, although they believed he was Mashiach, they didn't ask for Mashiach, any signs, any miracles, garnished. Meaning to say that he didn't demand of him to make an oyster or moifis in order to believe in him that was Mashiach. This is a proof that Mashiach does not need to make oysters or moifsim or do supernatural things, because we see over there that it wasn't necessary. Then the Rambam continues and says like this: the most important thing is as follows. That this Torah, its laws and its statutes, are forever and ever. They may see and you can add onto it and you can deduct from it. And someone who does add to the Torah, or someone who takes away from the Torah, or he misinterprets the Torah, and he changes the ideas of the mitzvahs from their simple understanding. Here it says vadai, badai, virasha, v'apikeiros. So it quotes it here. Badai means a liar. In the actual Rambam, the Rambam that I have in front of me, it doesn't. It says hareza bevadai. Rasha v'apikeiros, he is certainly a Rasha and a heretic. It's just not called believing in Mashiach or in Torah. Now, we're going to address the fact that the first part and the second part of this halacha seem to be disconnected. The first part, we're talking about Mashiach making an oyster or moifis. Does Mashiach have to make miracles? Does he have to make something supernatural in order for me to believe that he's Mashiach? And then in the second part, he speaks about the fact that Torah is forever and can't be changed. Now, from the fact that in the end of this halacha that we just learned, the Rambam ends with Ikir. The Ikir is the most important thing, is that Torah is unchanging, the Torah is forever. This seems to imply that if someone comes and says the Mashiach has to introduce new things and do supernatural miracles in the world, this would be either adding or taking away from Torah. Going against the idea that you're not allowed to change anything in Torah. But we have to understand what's the connection between the two things. In other words, it seems to imply that Rambam says that the truth is that you're not allowed to change anything in Torah. So if you're going to say that Mashiach has to do something new, then you're changing something in Torah. But what's the connection? The fact that you want Mashiach to make a nace is seemingly not connected to the fact that something is going to change in Torah. So this is a question that we have on the Rambam. What is the connection between the fact that that Mashiach does not need to make Oisis Oimavsim with the fact that the Torah is unchanging forever? You say to me, there's more to this. With regards to Navi, the Rambam writes in Hilchas Yisei De'atera that any Navi that stands up and says that he was sent by Hashem does not have to make a sign or a miracle like some of the signs that Moshe Rabbeinu brought to Mitzrayim, which he did before Parai, or like this miracles that Eliyahu did or Elisha did, which were supernatural things. So yes, which changed the nature of the world. He doesn't have to do that. Any Navi that comes and says, I'm a Navi. So we don't say, make blood in the water, or awake this dead baby, this dead child from the dead. No. So what is the sign that he's a Navi? That he should say things that are going to occur in the future. And his words should be ratified. This should come true. So also over there, the Rambam negates the idea that a Navi has to make an Oyser or Moifis. He doesn't conclude over there that the Torah is forever, which implies that the Rambam doesn't see the two as connected. The fact that we believe that Mashiach, that a Navi does not have to make a miracle, is not necessarily connected to the fact that the Torah is forever and unchanging. That's how the Rambam writes it in Yisei De'atera. So why all of a sudden over here does the Rambam connect it to? So besides the fact that we don't understand how they connect, we see clearly that they're not connected from Yisei De'atera, where the Rambam speaks about one without the other. Ule idach, kaisiv sham shalav lasos ois. On the other hand, it says that Mashiach has to make a sign. It's not a Mashiach, that a Navi has to make a sign. He has to say things that are going to happen in the future, and they have to actually come true. So it's another part of the question. Here we said the Mashiach doesn't have to do any Oyser Meifis. Doesn't even have to say what's going to happen in the future. But by a Navi, we say he does have to do that. You have to prove that he's a Navi. So the contradiction between the halacha here about Mashiach and the halacha over there about the Navi is in two different details. Number one, that the Rambam does not connect the fact that he does not need an Oyser or Meifis and the fact that the Torah is forever and unchanging. And then the fact is that over there is an Ois that's expected from the Navi, and over here we don't expect even that from the Navi. So that's our question on halacha Gimel. What is the connection between the first half and the second half of the halacha? Why does the Rambam indicate that making an Oyser or Meifis is expecting from Mashiach to make an Oyser or Meifis is changing something in Torah? Siv Zayin takes us to the next halacha Dalet. Halacha Shlachin is a Behilchas Malachim Amshach Rambam. The Rambam continues. If a king will arise up from the dynasty of David HaMelech, who studies Torah, and he is learning Torah David. Think that he's involved in mitzvahs like David. Kifi Teira Shebiksav Shebal Peh, following Teira Shebiksav and Teira Shebal Peh. The Yaakov called Yisrael Leilich Bo Lechazik Bitka, and he's going to compel the Yidden to go in the way of Torah and to rectify its cracks or its breaches in the observance of mitzvahs. The Yilchem Lechemes Hashem, and he's going to battle the wars of Hashem. Hareza Becheskas Shehu Mashiach. Then we could, with assurance, consider him to be Mashiach. He has the chazaka that he's Mashiach. The Im. And if he succeeds in the above, Ubana Mikdash Bimkaime, and builds the Beis Hamikdash in the right place, the Kibis Nitre Yisrael, and gathers the dispersed of the Yidden, Harezeh Mashiach Bevadai, then he is definitely Mashiach. And he's going to fix the world, rectify the world to everyone together to serve Hashem. So we have to understand. If we're talking about what makes Mashiach, either Becheskes Mashiach or Mashiach Bavadai, we're talking about what he has to do. But he doesn't at all talk about the qualities of Mashiach. Not even in other parts of this Perek. We don't mention it all. The Rabbi himself writes in Hilchas Tshuva, I'm quoting from Milchas Shuv over here. That king that's going to come from the offspring of David, is going to be wiser than Shlomo HaMelech. The Navi God Lukadav L'Moshe Rabbeinu, and he's going to be a great Navi, similar to Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Rambam, and this was mentioned in the end of Sifhei, where we spoke about the comparison of Mashiach to Moshe Rabbeinu, that he's a Navi like Moshe Rabbeinu, but it doesn't mention it here at all. In these halachas and Perek Yud Aleph, we talk about what Mashiach has to do. We don't speak about the qualities that make him Mashiach or that Mashiach has. So that's our question on halacha Dalid, on the next halacha in Rambam. So very quickly, we're trying to understand in halacha Aleph, why does the Rambam enumerate so explicitly the different psukim about the Shnei HaMashichim, and which parts of the psukim speak about each one of the Mashichim? In halacha Beis, we ask, why is Arei Miklat in a separate halacha, the Raya from Arei Miklat? And why does he say Af Ba'arei Miklat and not Af B'Parshat Shoftim? Why does he also, we have to understand why he uses the term Shnei HaMashichim? Why is David called Mashiach? Why doesn't he call it any other way? Why Dafke David? And then we asked in the next halacha, we asked, why is the Rambam connecting the idea that Mashiach has to bring an Oisem Meifes with the fact that the Torah is forever and unchanging? And then we final question that we asked on the halacha Dalid, why does the Rambam not mention at all the milas, the qualities, the great qualities that Mashiach is going to have? Now we're going to learn Seif Ches, and in Seif Ches is going to be the Nekudas Habiur, the one point that will lead us to understand the answers to all the questions, ultimately, and that too is going to come with a question. And let us say the answer, the explanation in all of the above. By first prefacing and asking, pointing out the fact that the Rambam put these halachas in the very, very end of the very last sefer of the 14 Svarim of Mishnah Torah. If you say that Azmanim, seemingly, chronologically, it should have been done earlier. In the beginning of the Chelek, the Rambam says, there were 3 mitzvahs Yidden were commanded to do upon arriving in Eretz Yisrael, to appoint a king, and to destroy, to annihilate the offspring of Amalek, the living is Beis Abchira, and to build a Beis Hamikdash. And they're based on that. So if these mitzvahs were given as soon as the Yidden went into Eretz Yisrael, the Rambam should have put these halachas much earlier. If you're looking at the Seder Azmanim, then these halachas became relevant much earlier in the chronological order of things. So why does the Rambam put Hilchas Malachim at the very end of the Sefer Hayad of the 14th Svarim of Mishnah Torah. So we can explain as follows. The fact that the Rambam put this at the very end of Sefer Hayad, which is a Sefer of Halachos, like we mentioned earlier, Hareyu Madgish, the Rambam is emphasizing and underscoring a very, very important point. The ultimate completion and fulfillment of the Torah, halacha, and the fulfillment of halacha, which the Rambam is a Sefer Halachos, and he's been giving us 14 svarim filled with halacha to get to the ultimate fulfillment of these halachas. This can only happen when we have kings. As it's understood, simply, basically, that the ultimate fulfillment, to be able to observe all of the mitzvahs and all of the halachas in Torah, he can only be when there's a king and all the Yidden. Through him, through the king, we could fulfill the mitzvah of going to war for Hashem. For example, to destroy the offspring of Amalek. Mitzvahs, livnes beis abchira, and the mitzvah of building a beis hamikdash. Only then can you fulfill all the mitzvahs. If there's no beis hamikdash, then there's a whole set of halachas that can't be fulfilled. So only once you have a king who goes to war against those who have to be destroyed, and who builds a beis hamikdash, only then can you fulfill all the mitzvahs. So the Rambam is telling us that now that I taught you all the halachas in the 14 svarim of Sefer Hayad, I'm telling you, when can you actually reach the completion of the observance of all these mitzvahs? It can happen only once you fulfill the mitzvah of Malachim. That's where the Rambam puts it at the end. The poil, zen nasa David HaMelech. In actuality, this was accomplished by David HaMelech. Shemolach, I'll call Yisrael, that he was the king on all the Yidden, Yisrael v'Yehuda. Later on, after Shlomo HaMelech, the Malachim were divided into Malchi Yehuda, Malchi Yisrael. But in the time of David HaMelech, he was still the king over all of the Yidden. Who kavash Eretz Yisrael, he conquered Eretz Yisrael, which is Gmar Ushleimus de Milchamos. This is the completion, the culmination of the wars, where he was able to conquer Eretz Yisrael, so there shouldn't have to be any more wars. Like the pasuk says, "V'Hashem iniach lemisav mikalevav." The Eibishter allowed him to rest from all of his enemies surrounding him. V'al yodei oisa al schola achonis al kolpanim. Shal binyan beis hamikdash b'Yerushalayim, and David was also there to begin the preparations for building the beis hamikdash in Yerushalayim. Vayemer David zehu beis Hashem, like we see in the pasuk that David said, this is the place where we're going to build a house for Hashem. And because of David HaMelech, there was a possibility to fulfill all the mitzvahs. There was no more need for war, and there was going to be a beis hamikdash where you could fulfill all the mitzvahs for which you need a beis hamikdash. So in actuality, the only person that was able to accomplish this idea that there's a melech that could bring about the shleimus of kiyum hatera hamitzvah v'hahalocha was David HaMelech. And now we understand why David is such a key player in this Perek. Why David is the proof. While David is used as the other Mashiach, because David is the one who fulfilled what a melech has to fulfill, and what, as we will see in the Sikha, what Mashiach is going to do. We're going to stop here for this week, and we're going to continue next week in Mirz Hashem to see how the entire Perek, Yud Aleph, everything in the Perek, and all of our questions all lead us back to understanding that Mashiach is going to do this same job of being the melech, who is going to restore kiyum hatera v'mitzvah v'halacha, which we were not able to do in Zman HaGalus. And based on that, we'll answer all the questions that were brought in the first part of the Sikha, which we just learned today.